One of the most fascinating things about chemistry is that we can use it as a tool to not only make incredibly complex molecules from simple building blocks, but we can also use it to understand why those building blocks came together in the first place. There's something really remarkable and beautiful about that fact, and I hope I can convince you to at least consider that point of view. Today, I want us to take a look at one way we can make gigantic molecules that are so large that some people actually doubted they could even exist. You're probably familiar with plastics, things like water bottles and shopping bags, but you might not know that plastics are composed of polymers, which are themselves made up of enormous things called macromolecules. Now, conceptually, we can build big molecules by stringing smaller ones together. In this case, we call the smaller building blocks monomers. But how can we actually make monomers stick together to form larger and larger molecules? There are actually a fair number of techniques you can use, but I want to show you one method that takes advantage of strain, specifically strain in the monomer. Now, before we get into any details, I want to quickly thank the National Science Foundation because they helped make this video possible. Alright, no more chit-chat. Let's hit the lab. The reaction I want to show you is called a ring-opening metathesis polymerization. We'll take a look at a simplified mechanism in just a second, but we're basically making a macromolecule by opening up cyclic monomers and sticking them together through olefin metathesis. All this really means is that two different double bonds are going to exchange their substituents. Now, the colorless liquid is just a solution of our monomer, which is norbornene in this case. Don't worry, I'll show you the structure when we go through the mechanism. You can see that the solution has a relatively low viscosity, and it freely flows around when I swirl the vial. The solid that I add, though, is the key to making the entire polymerization work. It's a ruthenium-based catalyst that's really good at doing olefin metathesis. The color of the reaction mixture changes because the catalyst is dissolving, but it'll take a few minutes for the real magic to happen. Just the right amount of time to take a peek under the hood and see what's really going on. The catalyst we're using in this polymerization is a ruthenium carbene, kind of like the structure shown here. Now, this isn't the exact catalyst that I actually used, but it's close enough. The catalyst has a lot of different things attached to it, like this N-heterocyclic carbene, these chlorines, this phosphine. But the business end of the molecule is really the carbene center, the part with the double bond between carbon and ruthenium. Now, since we're using a simplified version of the mechanism, we can really just distill everything down to the important carbene bit. Our monomer is norbornene, and you can see that it looks like we actually have two different rings of carbon that are stuck together. One of those rings is 5 atoms in size, and the other is 6 atoms. This bicyclic structure is actually what introduces strain, which you can think of as a stress that raises the chemical potential of the molecule. Relieving that stress by breaking apart one of the rings is what really drives the entire polymerization. Our catalyst can make this happen by first reacting with the olefin in our monomer. Pi electrons can be nucleophilic sources, and it turns out that the metal carbene has electrophilic character. We can draw curly arrows showing the pi electrons attacking our carbene, while the carbene electrons simultaneously bite back on the norbornene. This creates a new carbon-carbon bond and a new carbon-ruthenium bond. We call this a cycloaddition because we've added two things together to make a new cyclic group. In this case, it's the 4-membered metallocyclobutane. We're finally ready to relieve the ring strain that was present in our monomer through what's known as a cycloreversion. Basically, we break open one of the original monomer rings, while also breaking the bond between the ruthenium and the original carbene carbon. And look what's happened. We've created a single ring, 5-membered one in this case, and we've essentially shuffled the double bonds that were present in our system. Getting to this intermediate from our starting carbene is part of a sequence we call initiation. Basically, it means the catalyst needs some time to become active for the polymerization. Now, the reaction isn't a one-way street. In fact, every single step in the initiation stage is completely reversible. This means that instead of adding a new monomer, the molecule can actually close itself back up. Now, this reversibility has a lot of interesting implications, but for now we'll just point out that it can actually lead to scrambling of stereochemistry in the metallocyclobutane and the ring-open product. In the forward direction, though, we can add another monomer through the same mechanism we just described. Now, with the second monomer added, we can see a pattern that's starting to emerge. we're building a sequence of cyclopentane rings that are connected to each other through double bonds. Now this metathesis chemistry can happen again and again, going through the same intermediates over and over and growing the macromolecule 1 unit at a time. Eventually, we'll use up all the available monomer so we can represent the final polymer product using this bracket nomenclature. You can read the structure of the repeating unit from left to right. Here we have a cyclopentane that's connected to a double bond, and the double bond is attached to the next unit. And we can see that this matches the pattern we noted earlier. We use a numerical subscript to denote how many repeats are present in the macromolecule, 2 for a dimer, 3 for a trimer, and so on. If we want to just show that there's an unspecified number of repeats, though, we can label the brackets with a letter. While this is a big simplification for the polymerization mechanism, it's a good starting point for understanding what's going on in the flask. The best part, though, about making polymers is about to come, so let's cut back to the lab. In real time, only a couple of minutes have passed since the previous lab clip. The catalyst I'm using initiates fairly quickly, and you can see that something has definitely happened to the viscosity of the solution. The reason it looks so viscous is because it's filled with enormous molecules. Think of it like a bowl of giant spaghetti. You wouldn't be able to easily remove an individual noodle because it would get tangled in its neighbors. This is kind of analogous to what's happening with our solution of macromolecules. In any case, we can isolate our product in a pretty cool way. If we add our macromolecules to a lousy solvent, like the flask of methanol that I have here, they'll desperately try to solvate themselves, and as a result, they quickly aggregate and form a solid mass at the bottom of the flask. You can see the little beads that form when I add the polymerization mixture. It's basically the macromolecules hanging onto their solvent for dear life. Eventually, though, the solvent diffuses into the methanol, and the macromolecules have no choice but to precipitate. If we add the rest of the polymerization mixture in a single go, then we form one giant ball of macromolecules in the flask. This entire glob is a polymer, and we can collect it by filtration, and then ultimately process it into a plastic product. If you've made it this far in the video, then I just want to say thanks for taking some time out of your day to spend it with me. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this content and you'd like to learn more about other chemistry topics, then maybe consider leaving a comment below. Until next time though, keep being your own curious self.